My name is Brian Johnson. I am the president of MassMEDIC, and I am coming to you from the outer reaches of the universe, as you can see from our cool new Zoom background. I'm really excited to welcome you guys to another one of our terrific town hall events. This is the May edition, and today we'll be featuring a really robust discussion on finding unique sources of funding when you're an emerging company. And we have two really exciting companies in the Massachusetts ecosystem, and Sherlock Biosciences and Cardio Focus. And we're going to hear from the CEOs of those two companies in a discussion that's going to be moderated by Mr. Bernie Haffey. And we also are going to hear from the investment community with Bruce Robertson from HIG Capital. But before I turn it over to Bernie, I want to take just a few housekeeping announcements, because, you know, on our town halls, we like to kind of remind you guys of what's coming up in the MassMEDIC universe. So today, this event is sponsored by Haffey & Company, and we're delighted to have them, as well as our series sponsors, Greenlight Guru and QAD, a new series sponsor to the Town Hall universe. And I'm also going to give a shout out to our friends at Toxicon, NPR, Mullings Group, Zymedica, Boston Analytical, and R&Q Solutions for their support of this program as well over the course of the year. We're also going to be hosting a series of events. We're coming into a pretty great run here in June and the end of May. We have, I'm just going to throw out some of these events we have upcoming. We have a cybersecurity and connected medical products webinar with our partners at Intertech. Then we have a program really about a roadmap for digital health partnerships, and this is going to be hosted by Goodwin Procter. That's on June 2nd, and pardon me, the first one with Intertech is on May 27th. Then on June 8th, we have MedTech product feasibility and 5 points you don't want to miss, and that's with Vision Elements, as well as a session on using AI in medical imaging. So those are both on June 8th. And then on June 17th, we have the top 3 testing tips for successful verification, and that's hosted by our partners at Sunrise Labs. These are all really fantastic virtual programs. You know, as we're kind of rounding the corner into summer and we're seeing Massachusetts start to reopen, you know, I want you guys to know that we're going to start dipping our toes into some in-person events at some point in the fall. So we'll be announcing them soon, but really have no fear. We're going to still have a really robust virtual programming schedule as we continue this kind of new world that we live in. I think these are great programs. We get to bring incredible guests like today and hear their insights on really important issues. I know in the past few town halls, we've focused on some policy with Chairman Richie Neal of the House Ways and Means Committee and our 2 members of our congressional delegation. But today we're going to really dig into fundraising and what it's like for an emerging company. And we're going to hear some really terrific stories about how these companies were successful in raising money. Before I hand it over to Bernie, I'm just going to give you guys a couple quick housekeeping notes on the interplay here of how you're going to ask questions. So we're going to use the Q&A tab there on your control board. You can put questions in there at any time during the program. We will pause at a point to answer those questions. This program is being recorded, and we'll be providing everyone who registered with a copy of the video, and as well as this going into our video archive once we make sure to get that prepared. And with that, I'd like to hand the reins over to Mr. Bernie Haffey from Haffey & Company. Bernie, I really look forward to this conversation, so please take it away from here.
Me too, Brian. Thank you, and thanks for having us on your program today. I'm a former CEO. I've run 2 venture-backed companies in MedTech. Currently sit on the board of On Target Laboratories in West Lafayette, Indiana. It's a Purdue spinout with the mission to make cancer visible during surgery. I also help a lot of organizations through our consulting firm, Haffey & Company, where we work primarily with newly appointed CEOs. And so that's a bit about me. Bruce, could you share a bit about yourself?
easier if I can, it'd be much easier to share about myself if I unmute. And by the way, you mentioned, Brian mentioned opening things up. I think my favorite thing about opening things up is I will no longer have to unmute myself. I can just start talking, and there's no way anybody can silence me with the mute button anymore. But anyway, it's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. Appreciate MassMEDIC having me on. As Brian said, I'm Bruce Robertson with HIG Capital. HIG is a now global private equity firm. We manage about $44 billion in total. And in particular, I'm one of the leads of a fund we call HIG BioHealth Partners, which is a dedicated healthcare fund focused primarily in medical devices, pharmaceuticals, and clinical diagnostics. We do a little bit on the service side when one of those three sectors is the customer, so things like CDMOs and CROs. I am personally trained as an engineer, so I have invested a bit on the pharma side, but I probably spent about 80% of my time in medical devices. And we generally on the med tech side think of ourselves a little bit more as a growth investor. We like to see FDA approval and established payment, whether it's reimbursement or self-pay. And we're happy to come in at the early launch phase, even with $1 million or $2 million in revenue, or even just FDA approval and getting ready to launch. But we usually, on the med tech side, we generally don't take regulatory risk. On the pharma side, we do take regulatory risk. We just need to see reasonably solid human proof of concept with safety and efficacy. And diagnostics, probably a bit more like our med tech strategy, tends to be a bit more commercially focused. So that's a little bit about us.
Thank you, Bruce. Bert, could you share a bit about yourself with them?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Bert Barrett. I'd like to also thank MassMEDIC and Bernie for the opportunity to speak today. I hope the insights I have to share are helpful to some or all of the audience. I'm the CEO and president of CardioFocus. I'm also an engineer, and I have a science degree and a business degree, and I've spent now 35 years in the medical device industry, all of it in class 3, but also cutting edge medical technology. I spent the last half of my career at CardioFocus with a great team here, helping to build the company and our product, which is called the HeartLight System. It's a cardiac ablation device for the treatment of atrial fibrillation, and we've successfully financed the company for an extended period of time now to become a global commercial company. And that's what I'm happy to talk more about to you in the coming minutes.
Thanks, Burke. And Rahul.
Great, thank you. So thanks again, MassMEDIC and Bernie, for having me here today. I'm excited to listen to my co-panelists and share a little bit about my own story. So as for me, I am the co-founder, president, and CEO of Sherlock Biosciences. So I founded the company with a number of other luminaries. I'm not the luminary, they were the luminaries in the CRISPR and synthetic biology space. And we as a company are developing synthetic biology and CRISPR-based molecular diagnostics that are targeted and in development for self-administration. So very simple, power-free systems that can be used anywhere for self-administration, similar to tests you buy off the shelf, like the pregnancy tests and some of the antigen tests, except these are lab-accurate molecular tests. My own background has been from the science side all the way through the business, but always in diagnostics and medical devices. So well within, I think, the same experiences here of my co-panelists. So very excited to share that journey and more specifically Sherlock's beginnings to current status.
Outstanding. Thanks, gents. Let's get into it. The topic for today is alternative sources of financing for organizations. And so we thought maybe we'd start with Bruce and a question as to whether there is a classic or standard model before we go into some of these alternatives and what that looks like today.
Yeah, I think my answer is there used to be a fairly standard model, and there really isn't today. So when I think back to when I first started in this business about 20 years ago, the standard model was you'd go out and raise, if you were now assuming the company is at a fairly early formation stage, you'd raise seed money from a seed fund or angel money from angels, or there are some institutional angel funds. and you'd build the company for a few years. Then you'd find a early stage Series A type investor, and they'd lead the next round. You hope at a step up in valuation. And then as things progressed, if you hadn't exited yet, you would find a later stage investor. And it was all fairly smooth and straightforward. That model really doesn't exist in either medtech or biopharma anymore. In biopharm, as probably everybody in the Boston area knows, it's really evolved into a situation where most of the money that's going to be needed by the company, at least theoretically through exit, is raised very early in the company's life. A lot of that's actually company formation by the funds that do it. So it's very common to see very large $150 million early round financings tranched all the way through sort of to the exit. In medical devices, I'm sure any entrepreneur on the call knows, early stage capital has become much harder to come by. They're really, and I get this question all the time, by the way, from entrepreneurs that we talk to, and we love what they're doing, but it's too early for us. And we tell them that, and the answer, the question that comes back is typically, well, okay, who's doing early stage medtech? Can you make some introductions? And there are a handful of funds that are doing early stage medtech. But the challenge, and I think this is the challenge that created opportunities, and we're going to hear about these opportunities from guys like Burke and Rahul and how they figured out creatively how to finance, is, and it definitely applies at the earlier stage, but it's really, it could potentially happen throughout the life of the company. In the absence of early stage capital in particular, you have to be creative. And one of the challenges that we found, and we used to invest earlier in medical devices, but one of the challenges is that it's hard to make the numbers work. Back in the days where Boston Scientific was acquiring 25 companies a year when they achieved clinical success, you could make the numbers work. Increasingly, our thesis around a medical device investment assumes that to get to an exit, you've got to get to probably a minimum of 10 to 20 million in revenue, and oftentimes it's a little bit more than that. So if you're starting at a very early stage and you've got a PMA trial ahead of you, it can be difficult to make the math work on an exit, particularly if you make the assumptions that it'll be a middle of the road medical device exit. Even a good middle of the road, if there is such a thing, medtech exit might be 350 million, 400 million. It's pretty good. It's still hard to make the numbers work if you've got to run a long PMA trial. So that, necessity is the mother of invention, I think, created some of the creative financing structures and opportunities that we're going to talk about today. But there really, in my mind, there really isn't any standard way to do it. There used to be, but I think today you really have to think creatively, particularly in those early stages. And I think one of the things we can talk through today and hopefully be helpful to the audience is, how do you do that in a way that finances the company, but doesn't hamstring you going forward? And I've got examples I'll talk about later. I think we'll have an opportunity to do some cases where really good companies did things they probably felt like they sort of had to do to get the money, but then it makes it harder to raise money later. So when you get into a zone where you are commercial, and frankly, there's plenty of capital out there for commercial stage medical device companies. I would argue as an investor, too much sometimes. It's gotten a little bit competitive, and pricing valuations have gone up, sometimes to levels that we don't particularly like. But you got to get there. So again, the challenge is find the creative capital, but not in a way that closes doors in the future.
Excellent, Bruce. Thank you. So there is no longer a standard model, which I think is why this topic is so timely and hopefully valuable to the attendees. Bruce, could you walk us through your most recent financing and how that developed and played out at CardioFocus?
Our most recent. Sorry, you talking? Was that?
Oh, I'm sorry. I meant that for Burke.
The other B with nice hair.
The other B. Yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah, Burke. Could you take us through your most recent event and how that came together at CardioFocus?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So this is a little later in the stage of the development of the company and the development of the product. But a few years ago, as we were completing our FDA pivotal trial, let me maybe just take a quick step back. So the device, not surprisingly, is a class 3 device. So there's significant investment in all of the testing and the validation data. And typically in my field, large pivotal clinical studies. Ours was actually a randomized pivotal clinical study. And the space itself is very attractive. Next year, the electrophysiology business will be an $8 billion business, and the bulk of that is AFib ablation, which is what our product does. And it's grown double digits every year, except for last year because of COVID. So it's an attractive market. So we had an attractive product, but a complex product where there was a significant amount of development time and a long clinical and regulatory path. And we were actually approached by a company in Asia in the space looking for a unique product, a new offering. And they came to us right around the time we were running and close to completing our FDA pivotal trial. And we put together a distribution agreement. And it looked really on the surface like a lot of distribution agreements. Of course, these are hard to put together when you're sitting around the table and you don't know even how long it will take to get approval. But they liked the product and they were really interested in an offering like ours in the space. So we put together a distribution agreement. And then we started to transfer a lot of information. And if anybody's never worked with partners, this partner happened to be in Japan. I used to joke with the team that, for every question we answered, we were privileged to receive 10 more. So they this is sort of a cultural thing. They dig really deep. What was great, I think, for us and our relationship with them is we have a rock solid engineering team here and a really incredible clinical team. And so we have a strong foundation. I think that was really an important part of the rest of the story I'm going to tell here. And they were ultimately able to shave a huge amount of time off of the time to market by successfully using our US pivotal study to achieve Japanese approval. Not one single clinical study patient had to be treated or enrolled in a study in Japan. It's a big deal. It's partly because some of the rules there changed right around the time we were beginning to work with them, but it's partly because of the quality of the study we ran. And so they launched the product and they loved the product. And right around then, we were really looking for capital to gen the product. And so the CEO was here for a visit, and I said to him, well, you're public on an exchange in Asia, and you have access to relatively inexpensive capital. Could you make us a loan? And it turned into a pretty significant loan, tranched based on some milestones, with not a lot of strings attached, but really with a handshake. And by that time, we had developed a real partnership in I would say, the Japanese sense of it. A handshake that the bulk of the funding would go to developing the next gen products, which we did, and we did really quickly. And also, they were approved in Europe and in the US very rapidly, and they're performing incredibly well clinically and commercially. One of the things we didn't agree to at the time of the loan was the distribution agreement for the next gen. So the products were performing well. It was time to negotiate the distribution agreements. Our partner was salivating for our next gens. And so we were able to come to an agreement to extend our relationship and put a whole distribution agreement together. And the debt was converted to equity on terms that both parties were happy with, but I'll say that our investors were very, very pleased with. And Bruce is our largest investor. You see him shaking his head up and down. I would say that if you sat there when this all started and tried to plan this out or map it out, you could never do it. It's too complicated. It's too hard to figure out. But and I have some other stories I could tell, but in particular, I think picking the right partner and then in developing real partnerships was the true key to the ultimate outcome here. So I'll stop there.
Yep. and a lot of trips to Japan and a lot
Yeah,
of karaoke.
I have to sing some songs. I always pick a partner who has a better voice, and you have to do those things.
How many years did it take you from first meeting these folks to the first to the loan agreement?
It's like 4 or 5.
Yeah.
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 These don't happen overnight. I think that's really important
Nope.
to appreciate.
Yeah, especially in that part of the world. So great job on that, Burke. Thank you. Let's go to Rahul, if we could, on some of the early work you did at Sherlock to get it funded, and so yeah, let's hear some of that.
So I think I continue Bert's theme of you can have a plan, but you need to be prepared to respond to the circumstances you're in, which is, I think very much of what Bert had to navigate. And it's the same with company formation. So when we were forming Sherlock, there were a lot of different trains moving at the same time. We were licensing in 2 very different technologies with very different applications, but within the same market space and similar development paths, and at the same time raising capital. And these were platforms. So each of them could do many things, and we had to make decisions around what we were going to do. That was really a critical decision point for how we thought about bringing capital. And there was a point where we were working with a syndicate with a lead investor, and that lead investor was contingent on closing these license agreements that we were working on. And as time progressed and we got to know each other, it wasn't clear that for the vision of the company this was the right investor. And so the decision point that we had to make was, let's continue just to make sure, because we don't know as we get to know each other. And do we then invite them into other conversations we're having prior to closing that deal? And those other conversations were around how might the applications we have be sponsored by Philanthropic? And so we had made a very strong relationship through one of my founders, David Wall, with Open Philanthropy, which is a group dedicated to developing healthcare solutions, worldwide, in both developing and developing world applications. And it was actually, I think, in retrospect, very much the right decision to keep these things in parallel as opposed to sequential or dependent. And we were moving forward with this with the investors, and at the same time working to develop the application set and the application itself to the Philanthropic group. And what came of it was a lot of excitement around what we were doing, particularly in our CRISPR and synthetic biology platform capabilities. And so what we were able to do is align with the Philanthropic organization around the way the platform would be developed. And so that became critically important to us because it wasn't necessarily around a single application they wanted to see develop. We came together around this notion that a better set of diagnostic tools is beneficial to all, so long as it achieves certain performance characteristics that make it widely accessible. And so they got behind that with a couple of infectious disease applications. This is all pre-COVID, so it was not as prescient. It was prescient, but it was lucky too that we would be developing viral diagnostics. So while we were doing that, we had actually come to an agreement that this was going to be a big project. It was going to be at least a $30 million project, and they agreed to provide that capital. And they then decided that we think we should also be taking an equity stake in the company. And so while we were working with this other lead investor and losing, what we thought was alignment with them, we had this other group that was really supportive to a very large tune of $30 million that they agreed they would split into a tranche grant of 17.5 million, 10 first, 7.5 later, and a note at 12.5 to drive the development of the general infrastructure of the company. And so that gave us a lot of flexibility and freedom, and enough flexibility and freedom that we actually walked away from our lead investor and began operation under both the note and the grant. And those were contingent on securing the licenses, which we did, and then launched the company shortly thereafter, which catalyzed a very rapid Series A close. And so converting that note and adding extra equity into the company to the tune of roughly 34 million in equity, and then another 17.5 in non-dilutive that was later augmented through other deals we did. So it actually created a tremendous. I don't want to dismiss the fact that we're very fortunate to land that kind of deal, and that they're a remarkable partner who are looking to achieve the same mission and vision we have in open philanthropy. But it also set the stage for us to direct the company in the direction we really felt was appropriate with the kind of investors that we wanted. And so in the end, what we're able to do is create leverage through alignment with this philanthropic organization to ensure that we could control the fundraising process in a way that made sure everybody was equitably treated in the process. And so we came out in a very strong position and became the foundation of a tremendous amount of capital that has been driving the company forward with a really capital efficient model of execution.
How large was the A round?
So the A round was that 34.
Oh, was it all? And
plus then the non-dilutive, which we added onto that. So in total, there's a little shy of 60 million into the company just off the A round, with dilutive and non-dilutive.
Who led the A?
The A was led by North Pond and Baidu Ventures. It was co-led.
Okay. And then I'll ask one final question. When the note converted, was there a discount?
Yes, there was a discount.
Pretty standard, yeah.
Standard discount. It was very equitable, fair discount, which was really, I think, their goal wasn't to bleed the company. Their goal was to enable us. And so it was a standard market rate.
Got it. Excellent. Okay. Great first round, Brian. Looks like we've got a couple of questions. Do you mind quarterbacking those to the panel?
Not at all. And I actually have a question as well, if you wouldn't mind indulging me. Bruce, maybe I'm just gonna throw this one out for you first, and then we have 2 more questions. In terms of investment in med tech, there's been a lot of discussion on the breakthrough product designation and the the MSIT program, which was recently delayed now till December 15th. That was announced last week. In your opinion, is that, as an investor, does that materially change any of your thoughts on med tech? Was this breakthrough immediate reimbursement tied to FDA classification something that was a net positive and something that would maybe get you back into that early stage? And then you're on mute, so I just want to make sure you know.
Once again, I'm on mute. Story of my life. So I'm not going to answer the second part of your question, whether it would entice us back into investing at an earlier stage in medtech. For now, the answer is probably no. But it isn't. So I think it's important for sure, because so many companies had this challenge where you spend several years, maybe 4, 5, 6, 7 years to get through a PMA approval from start, and you get approved, and fantastic, nobody wants to pay for your product. And I've been in that devil's triangle before, and it's awful, right? So you can always try to do the hand-to-hand combat and selling without an established code, but it's hard, and it's expensive, and it's slow. So harmonizing approval with reimbursement, I think, is a big step. And it's probably something that will at least cause us to reevaluate that part of our strategy. I think there's still challenges for us around, like I said, just making the numbers work, but cutting off a few years from approval through reimbursement is important. You know, for us, the ideal situation is when you just fall right into an established reimbursement scheme and you don't have to do anything new, because you know, even to the extent it's harmonized, there's still risk associated with it. You still have to get that reimbursement. So the ideal situation for us is when you're just moving right into an existing reimbursement situation. And importantly, you're not increasing costs. Our strategy for years has been better outcomes for patients and saves money for the overall system, or at worst is cost neutral. Adding cost to the system is just a loser these days.
Yeah. So don't let us lose you on mute. But I did want, because there's two more follow-up questions for you. But I just want to see, like, Burke, I mean, did you have any thoughts on this? Reimbursement continues to be, you know, a pretty tough overhang for our industry in terms of investment. Have you experienced pushback related to that?
Doesn't apply directly to CardioFocus. We're fortunate that we fall right into an existing reimbursement, but I do believe it is very important to the industry that we focus on rewarding innovation, and if innovative products should be first in line at the FDA, and there should be a prepared path for reimbursement where it's one government and it's one country. And especially, as Bruce said, if patient outcomes are better and the overall healthcare system is saving money, we're all interested in moving that forward more quickly and more efficiently.
Yeah. Great. So, you know, we have two questions here for, it looks like they're for Bruce, actually. The first one came in right after your intro. So I think you touched on something there that piqued their interest. And here's the question. Interesting statement. For medical devices, you prefer to invest after FDA approval, but for pharma, you're willing to invest prior to FDA approval. That seems contrary to what relative risk would indicate. Can you explain a seeming dichotomy? Did they get your statement right? Is there,
Sure.
you know, is there a sort of a dichotomy in those statements?
So I think the premise of the question is accurate, that the risk is typically higher in getting a drug approved than a device. I don't think many people would argue with that, although some devices can have challenges as well. But that's only half of the equation, right? It's risk, reward, and time. So I guess it's a third of the equation. And they're on the pharmaceutical side, typically the exits are larger, which isn't to say you can't have $1 billion medical device exit, but they're rare. Whereas in the pharma world, be it through the public capital markets or acquisition, the average exit is bigger. So that means you can take a little bit more risk and a little bit more time and spend more money to get there. So it just, again, we start everything at the end and work backward. What is the likely exit in terms of size, time, and structure? And by structure, I mean, if it's an M&A type, if you think it's a likely M&A outcome, are there 15 buyers or are there 2? Because if they're 2, the likelihood of getting a really competitive situation where you drive valuation up on the exit is obviously a lot lower. So I don't think it's incongruous to say we'll go earlier on pharma than medtech. It really has related to the risk return and ultimate IRR and timing of the potential exit.
Yeah, and anecdotally, I've heard that, you know, the sort of standard threshold for what's worth the opportunity cost for an investor is going up in terms of, you know, it might not be the size of what we want to invest in. I mean, but what we need to come out of it, and you know, is that, you know, are those hurdles continuing to get higher so that most VCs are really only looking for the billion-dollar exit and almost not unless.
I think that commentary, Brian, is sounds much more like a biopharma commentary than a medical device. So to state the obvious, we want the biggest possible outcome we can get. So we love areas where there's like atrial fibrillation, where CardioFocus operates, like oncology, where OnTarget is, the board Bernie's on, which HIG is also an investor in. But it's also the reality that medtech exits are often not that big. And then it comes down to something Rahul mentioned, which is capital efficiency. So we sold a company several years ago to Stryker called Hyperbranch Medical that we sold it for $220 million. That's not setting the world on fire, but it was a 7 or 8x because we didn't have to put a ton of money into it.
And then here's one more question for you. So while I have you, does HIG invest in combination products? And if so, what stage does the asset need to be in to be considered for investment?
Yeah, it's almost the same answer, Brian. Again, I have to start at the end and ask, what does the exit look like? Is it a combination product that's really a medical device? So the acquirers are Medtronic, Boston, J&J, Abbott, usual suspects. We're used to paying, like I said, $350 on the exit. Or is it really a pharmaceutical product with pharmaceutical value? So TAM, ultimately should dictate your exit. TAM and who your buyers are. If it's something, by the way, we almost never bet on an IPO, because if you're making a bet on what the public capital markets are going to look like in 3 to 5 years, then you've got a much better crystal ball than I do. So we're never going to assume an IPO. If the IPO market's available to us, absolutely we'll use it. But you really have to plan for M&A. And again, you got to look at capital requirements, exitability, timing, size. So if it looks, and of course, the regulatory process, is it going to be long and expensive, or is it relatively quick and less expensive? So definitely situational. So the answer is yes, we would definitely invest in combo products. Whether we would invest pre-clinic or pre-approval is totally situational.
And I take it you're going to do your own research as to who's going to buy it. You're not going to take the founder's word.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good question. I'm actually going to, if you don't mind, just elaborate very quickly.
Yeah.
Because I think it's important advice to entrepreneurs raising capital from folks like us is, to the extent you can put real thought into what the exit looks like, that's very helpful in an opening pitch to us, because we generally know who the buyers are and we generally know when they buy. But if you put some real analysis into it, precedent transactions, timing, pricing, things like that, a slide that says we'll exit in 3 to 5 years through M&A or IPO is not very helpful. Those are two routes of exiting a company that we're pretty familiar with. But if you actually put thought into it that helps us understand in your particular situation, particularly if you've had conversations with those folks and can share it, that's a big hurdle to get over.
Great. Thanks for that answer. I really appreciate it. Rahul, I think you're probably the best one to answer this one. This comes in. What are the best means to connect and get in front of these medtech philanthropic entities?
So it's not easy, which I'm sure that's the nature of the question. I think the most important thing, and probably the first step, is just ensuring that what you're developing is highly relevant to where they're looking next, not necessarily, what they've recently awarded, not necessarily, the latest news around them. I think usually by the time you see that, they've deployed how much they're going to commit to that area. So, the way it's interesting because philanthropy works, in my experience, I'm sure there's other experiences. In my experiences, philanthropy exists where there's not enough capital to get something important done. And the moment that enough capital is pushed into that area, it exits and tries to find the next area. And so it's almost like, you're always in business skating to where the puck's going to be. Just, you got to think about what is the philanthropic need for the populations important to that particular organization. You know, Gates Foundation has its focus, Open Philanthropy has theirs. There's a number of them separately, and we have actually money from both. And so the other element is, how much do they believe there is going to be investment in developing products for those needs? Because the less they believe someone's going to do it, the more likely they are to deploy that capital towards you. And what they want to see is that you're already on that path. You know, for Sherlock, even the earliest papers, while the company was in formation, was demonstrating this capability that filled that gap, so that when it came time to speak with Open Philanthropy and Gates Foundation, there were a number we were speaking with. It was clear that we were aligned better with some than others. And as we had those conversations, we progressed. Now, how we got those conversations was through developing and advancing the technology enough to get some attention, but then it's as much the network as it is the submission on the website that they have. And so who within our network, or my network, or members network, in this case, David Walt's network, was close to that philanthropic organization. And that affords you two things. One is not just the introduction, but also more insight into what they're looking for, so that you can have a more effective conversation. So it's not much different than raising capital in that sense, in terms of what you need to align and what you need to prove. It's just that where you're targeting is what is the next potential crisis that they're trying to avoid, or what crisis has reached too far that they're committed to ending it, because not enough people and not enough organizations are.
So if you're trying to anticipate that, though, and you don't have a direct connection in, is there any other publicly available documents you could look at?
Yeah, I think you can look at, there are reports from the World Health Organization. All of these groups do put out reports that it's sometimes useful to compare last year's to this year, just to see what's different in it. And then, there are organizations like Find that focus on these and there's Pew, and there's a series of these groups that, and the United Nations too, that are surfacing what they see as emerging issues. And I think there has been enough because of COVID that we're uncovering all new areas that require attention, that aren't just disease focused, but also infrastructure focused, that are getting more attention and are worthy of, which push towards platform development as opposed to specific applications.
That is great data points there. Thank you so much for that. Bernie, there is another question. We can hold off until, because I want to make sure
let's come back to that one, and go back to Bruce. I'm sorry, Burke. Burke, fascinating story about Japan. You've been at it for a while at CardioFocus. Can you share another alternative financing event story that might be interesting for the attendees today?
Yeah, sure, I'd be happy to. This story probably won't be as helpful to those of you that are entrepreneurs or earlier in the development of your company, but once you become commercial, and in particular if you have an attractive product, there's a whole host of other opportunities out there. And something that I've been working on for just the last 18 months or so is China. And I have to say, really honestly and frankly, that I just avoided China for a long time. I have, going back to, my undergraduate buddy from chemical engineering days was the CTO at Evergreen Solar. Maybe some of you in Massachusetts remember the Evergreen Solar study. And I had, heard my fair share of, tough stories. But our product is global and it's attractive, and there's a large market opportunity there. And I think it was just silly to continue to ignore it. And so I was a novice but I set about trying to learn what I could about how to approach the market. And I can just share really quickly, I think, what some of the key points are. The first is that it's a heterogeneous large country with a lot of different players, and there are really good potential partners there. So the first part of my effort was figuring out how to find who were the good potential partners, and that's just a lot of old-fashioned rolling up your sleeves and your homework. And what I found is that if you can connect with the right potential partners and the big ones, that really is the way to try to enter the Chinese market, because they have the heft and the capital, and usually the IP attorneys to protect you, to not only be a good partner, but to keep the copycats and others out. They scare away people that you might be concerned about. You have to go into it and say to yourself, I'm not going to get anything of value done if I don't give up some manufacturing rights. And that was maybe for us here, having spent a hell of a long time developing this really cool, complex technology, kind of giving the keys to the kingdom to anybody is something you have to just sort of accept. I'll say that you can do, if you find the right partner, and if they really want your product, you can hold back key technology. They don't like that. There's local incentives to the companies to get full manufacturing rights, but you can. If you find the right partner and you have an attractive product and they want it, you can hold back on the manufacturing transfer. To me, the key to the whole thing is that you're not vulnerable, and that you don't really need the capital. You have to go into these negotiations saying to yourself, I have to be able to walk. I couldn't have done, what I'm doing right now if my board had been all over me and we were desperate for the capital, because it's a difficult negotiation process. I would strongly recommend, if you can, to keep equity off the table. You take the CFIUS issues almost all off the table, and you put yourself in a position to have the scope of the due diligence that's going to be done on your company be at what I call the right level. So, again, if you have an attractive product and an attractive market, and somebody's willing to put together any kind of traditional deal, whether it's some upfront non-dilutive money or attractive transfer pricing or anything but equity, if you can keep equity off the table and have a little bit of a technology holdback, there are good partners there, and you can put together, I think, mutually beneficial distribution license agreements. But give yourself a lot of time. Go in from a position of strength, and you have to do some things in negotiating that I don't like to do style-wise. Like sometimes you just have to walk away. And a lot of people told me, just walk away. I'm like, I don't like to negotiate that way. It's like, no, you need to walk away. So you just have to get a little smart about their culture and their style, and take your time.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. I think that's a great segue, Raul, to the work you've done, similar work you've done with government sources.
Yeah, so I want to add a little bit to what Burke said, because we also dealt with China, and I think every experience that he had, we had on the equity side. And there are stylistic issues. There are continual requests for more every time you find a middle ground, and there is a requirement in some of those areas to just walk away. And we did do that. In fact, the lead investor we did formally walk away from, it wasn't because of posturing, it wasn't because of the style, it was just because they were misaligned around what we were trying to do. We did eventually bring in in Baidu a co-lead on the term sheet, and and this is one of the reasons we trusted them, with their requirement, because of CFIUS, that they not have any information rights to the company. They believed in the investment thesis, they believed in the management team, they believed in the vision, but they also knew that it was for them being, a very legitimate organization demonstrating that they want to maintain that when it comes to international trade, international positioning. And in fact, they extended the language that we had proposed to be more restrictive towards them in the investment, which gave us a lot of comfort. At the same time, we had another investor who was trying to do the same thing, but was incredibly demanding and was not timely, was not responsive, but was highly entitled in terms of what they believe they should obtain in the equity stake. So I want to second what Bert said because it's really important for everybody. So in terms of the department and the governmental side, so one of the things that we were fortunate to do is, and we did not take any COVID money as an organization because we were already well in the development path and past development for the COVID side. So we did actually get Department of Defense non-dilutive capital in a very similar vein to the way that we approached the philanthropy, which was there was a call for very unique diagnostics for very difficult pathogens to target with diagnostics that the government wanted to develop for the warfighter. And so went through a process of white paper all the way through to meeting in person in DC with the Department of Defense for the purposes of explaining what differentiated us. And that ultimately led to a multi-million-dollar contract that allowed us to do what's key for any company at our stage, which is further develop the platform and help narrow down the kinds of targets we would develop. And so there's been an incredible windfall of government funding for a lot of organizations because of COVID. But I think what's happening now, and I would encourage others to look at and think about, is that there's also been a recognition of why we needed that windfall around lack of infrastructure, lack of preparedness, and the need for extending our innovation, which is beyond COVID now. And so what was the earlier focus of DTRA, DARPA, DOD, ARPA, and others is now, I think, and then became constrained into COVID, is now expanding outside of COVID. And I encourage a lot of investigation into those BAAs and getting to know the organizations and the technology presentation process that goes along with it to prepare some of those applications, because there is an identified need broadly in the medical space, not just diagnostics, not just medtech, but everywhere, to be better prepared and to deliver better health today. And it's a great opportunity to pursue.
Excellent, thank you. Looks like we've got one more question here for Bruce. Maybe Bruce, you could touch on that, the top 3 things you look for in an investment, and then maybe close out with your perspective on SPACs today.
Sure. So before we invest in a company, they get a due diligence list that's about 10 pages long or longer. So to pick 3 from that list is not easy to do. But I would say the things that are sort of the quickest and easiest to pass on, assuming the company is fundamentally a strategic fit for us, it does start, as you could probably guess, the questioner put this in the question, it starts at the end with the exit, which is really related to target market size. And then I would say number 2, related to that, is a differentiated product that can really make a difference in that market. And that sort of leads to number 3, which is it's got to improve clinical outcomes at a lower or equivalent cost. Now you'll notice that I didn't say management, which if you're an entrepreneur in the crowd might be both surprising and disconcerting. And there are 2 reasons for that. One, when we start a project, we know the management team already, and that makes it easy. We love backing people we've backed before. If it's a new relationship, in the first instance, we're going to be getting to know them, and we'll figure out during the process whether it's a solid team or whether there are gaps in that team. And importantly, and this is probably a bit contrarian, I would stipulate 100% that you're not going to have a successful company without a really good management team. That management team does not have to be fully in place at the time we invest. So I think a lot of VCs say it's just management, we'll figure out the asset later. We're the opposite. And I think that's also a function of being a later stage investor, that we're really locked into the asset and the market. But we can fill holes in the team as we go if we have to, and we don't mind doing that. And then your last question was to wrap up with a little bit on SPACs. SPACs have obviously become popular. They're maybe a little bit less popular today than they were 6 weeks ago. We have put 2 companies into SPACs. One of them's announced, the other one isn't. And we, HIG Capital, have raised a couple of SPACs ourselves. And here's what I would say in a limited amount of time. It is definitely a viable route to get both capital and eventually liquidity for med tech companies, or really any companies in our space, biopharma or otherwise. But I would caution folks to be careful. When the SPAC mania started a couple of months ago, the mantra was easier and faster than a regular way IPO. That's a lie. They're not. They're at best equal in the amount of time it takes, and without a doubt more complicated, because you just have more parties at the table. You have the SPAC sponsors, you have the investors and management team of the company. Everybody has their own advisors, lawyers, et cetera. So it's not, I'm not exaggerating when I say I've been on calls with between 60 and 90 people on the call. Go through process and plan. And then the other thing I would caution is, if you're really not ready for a regular way IPO, then maybe you're just not ready to be public. And if you're not ready to be public, you shouldn't do it through a SPAC. And the challenge is there's a lot of SPAC money out there and a lot of SPACs looking for targets. So if approached by a SPAC, which then has to value you in a way that meets the SPAC requirements in terms of percentage ownership, you may actually get a valuation that you think is really attractive. But that means almost nothing until the public market has a chance to weigh in on that valuation, be it through the PIPE or the de-SPACing process. So I just would caution that it's not quite as easy as it may seem. And just because a SPAC approaches you to potentially acquire the company, I would not assume that that's an automatic and successful route to being a public company, particularly if you're not really public ready. So there's a lot more to the process, but in 2 or 3 minutes, that would be the advice I would give.
Yeah. Bruce, is there anything, the SEC stated recently that warrants should be accounted for as liabilities? What's your perspective on that? And I guess more broadly, do you think that will take any steam out of the instrument?
I don't think that in and of itself is taking much steam out. It was a windfall for valuation firms that get a chance to now value those warrants, right? So those folks are plenty happy. No, I don't. I think obviously the overall public markets have pulled back a bit in the last month or so. That's impacted it, and I think just generally the markets are realizing that it's not an easy path. It is a complicated path. Again, I don't want to be heard as being overly negative. I think it's a very viable route to getting public, and I think as an industry, it's a net positive that this is now an option. I'm just saying it's not quite as quick and easy as folks may think, and it is complicated. And if you're going to go down that path, find a law firm and a banker that's done a lot of them and get good advice, because it really is complicated. Yeah. And when we did our first one, I knew absolutely nothing. I feel like now I've got maybe an 8th or 9th grade education in SPACs, but I started out in kindergarten 6 months ago and had some really good advisors to get us smarter.
Excellent. Brian, do you want to help us wrap this up?
Yeah, wow, what a great conversation. I know I took a lot of notes, and I want to thank Burke and Bruce and Rahul, and of course Bernie for guiding a terrific conversation with us today. This is going to conclude our MassMEDIC virtual town hall for today, and this will be available for viewing on demand, and we'll distribute that to everybody who registered. I want to thank Happy and Company for your support today, and also our series sponsors, QAD and Greenlight Guru. Stay with us for next week's May 27th event, Cybersecurity and the Connected Medical Products. On behalf of MassMEDIC, I'm Brian Johnson. It's been our pleasure to spend this lunch hour with you today. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Brian.
Take care.
Thank you.